Welcome to Whips in the Dungeon and the Leather Journey. I have two channels, and the longer version of this video is going to be on the Whips in the Dungeon channel, but I'm going to edit it down and make a very laconic version to go on the Leather Journey. But I had a subscriber leave a comment, and they wanted to know what was my recommendation for someone interested in single tail for a beginner whip. What is the first whip you should buy? Well, there's a short answer to that and there's a long answer to that. So this is going to be the long answer, and I'll edit down the video to a short answer for the Leather Journey. But in my definition of single tails, any whip that ends with one tail is a type of single tail. So when we're looking at beginning single tails, the simplest single tail to begin with is a dragon tail, and it's probably one of the less expensive options. I have another video on the Leather Journey where I show how to make a homemade dragon tail out of a coat that I got from the Salvation Army, and I just cut it up so I could use the leather to make a 3-foot dragon tail. So if you begin with a dragon tail, I would recommend either a 3-foot or a 4-foot. I'll put a link to a vendor. Dragontails.net is my preferred vendor, but I will say that they're a little on the price scale. They're on the pricier end. They make an excellent dragon tail though. But you'll find vendors around the country and around the world making dragon tails, and dragon tails come in all sizes. I mean, this little dragon tail is about 18 inches long. I think it costs like 40 bucks, not very much. This homemade dragon tail cost me about $20 to make. And I'm not going to give prices on the vendors, dragon tails vendors make, because pricing changes from year to year, and hopefully this video will have some sustainability. So dragon tail would be one place to start. Another good place to start is with paracord. Now, when I came into leather 25 years ago, paracord wasn't being used to make dungeon toys, certainly not single tails. So I was introduced to kangaroo. Most of my whips that I throw in my collection are kangaroo, but for a beginning whip thrower, I would recommend either a 3-foot or a 4-foot paracord snake whip or paracord bull whip. Now, when you're into paracord, there's some cautions I'm going to give you, and one of the cautions is be very wary that most paracord platters are hobbyists, and this is not their primary job. So they're just doing this catch as catch can, or as they have time or passion or interest to do it. This paracord whip, one of the challenges of paracord is the paracord's the same thickness, the stranding's the same thickness all the way down, so as you come down and you drop strands, achieving a good taper with paracord is a challenge for the platter, and you can see that this plaiting isn't straight, that it twists around kind of like almost like a barber pole. So that's not as desirable as a paracord platter that's able to keep their plaiting straight. The length of the thong. Okay. One of the things with snake whips, paracord snake whips, is in the upper part of the thong, the cord tends to break down as you throw them over time, and they get what I call loosey-goosey. But inexpensive, good beginning place to start. Now the paracord bull whip, because it has a stiff handle, tends not to have as quick an issue in the early part of the thong as maybe a paracord snake would. This is an excellent example of really nice paracord bullwhip work by a platter. Okay, but as I said, hobbyists, this particular platter, primary job is being a hairdresser, single mom, several kids. They plait excellent whips when they have time to plait whips. But I waited what I would consider an excessive amount of time to actually receive this whip. And I'd actually almost given up on ever getting it, and then finally it showed up in the mail and I was all excited, very happy. So one of my recommendations for paracord is if you are able to go to a vending show where there's going to be some paracord whips sold and you can see one on the wall, pull it off, examine it, check the rollout, throw it a few times, see how it handles. Does it roll out accurately? Then, that's a good buy. I would be cautious about ordering a paracord online from a platter. I don't recommend buying your first whip off Amazon. I really don't. Now, when we get over to kangaroo, kangaroo is a little more expensive. I said I started out with kangaroo 25 years ago, but there are some economical options with kangaroo, and I'll talk to you briefly about them. To me, the ideal kangaroo dungeon whip has two bellies, a core and two inner bellies, and then the overlay, okay? But there's a build that whip makers do that are single belly builds, and typically they'll call those budget builds. For example, Mojave Outliers has a budget boudoir build. Her budget boudoir whips have a single belly and they're less expensive. So a 3-foot signal whip right now is running about $220. Well, that's about double what you would pay for a 3-foot paracord. Actually, this 4-foot paracord whip I got for $50, okay? A little 4-foot snake, $50 whip. It's, as I said, it's loosey-goosey in the upper part of the thong, but when we're just starting out for a beginning whip, you can throw bow and arrow. You can come off the shoulder. Well, it doesn't have the same core that a kangaroo whip would have, but you can come off the shoulder. I have to give it a little more momentum than I would with a kangaroo whip. I'm throwing a forward figure eight's no problem. With a snake whip, because of the loose fall, I typically don't throw these horizontally, but if you speed up the whip, you can throw it horizontally. I wouldn't throw it horizontally in the dungeon because it's just not accurate enough to get it on target. But with a forward figure eight, very accurate whip, only $50, okay? So that's actually, this paracord whip was cheaper than I could buy a dragon tail from a vendor. So that's not a bad place to start. But if you want to spend a little more money and get a kangaroo whip, then look maybe for your beginner whip at a budget build. And I'm going to say a budget build would be just with one belly. And for a little 3-foot snake whip, a single belly whip is adequate. So what do I recommend for your first whip? Well, a 3 or 4 foot signal whip or snake whip, or a 3 or 4 foot dragon tail. That's the short version of the answer to that question. What would I not recommend? Well, we're talking about whips in the dungeon and throwing in scenes, contact scenes with with a whip bottom. So we're not going to be throwing a 6-foot bullwhip. If someone asked me, well, what would be the first whip you would buy if you were going to sport crack in the park? Probably a 6-foot bullwhip or a 5-foot snake whip. Okay, so when we get over to 6-foot bullwhips, one of the reasons you don't start with those if you're interested in leather is because there's probably less than a half dozen dungeons in the entire United States that are large enough to accommodate someone throwing a 6-foot bullwhip. So here I am in my living room with a 6-foot 12 plat bullwhip, and if I was going to buy this whip, it would cost me over $600. Okay, so $600 for a kangaroo 6-foot bullwhip. If I get a 6-foot paracord bullwhip, I'm going to pay, easily half that amount. But again, I don't have any place to throw it other than at the park. And it's too long to throw in contact play for a beginner. So where is a beginner going to begin? A beginner is going to begin with a 3 or 4 foot paracord signal whip or snake whip, or a 3 or 4 foot dragon tail. Now, if you're primarily going to be throwing at house parties and there's not a lot of space, then I recommend a 3 foot signal whip, either paracord or single belly kangaroo. Signal whips can be thrown overhand and they can be thrown horizontal. So whatever style you end up with, you can throw either a signal or a dragon tail using both techniques. When you move into a snake whip and a bull whip, I don't recommend throwing those horizontally. You're pretty much limited to overhand in the forward figure 8, the bow and arrow, or over the shoulder. And you can see a well-made paracord whip comes off the shoulder quite nicely. This whip was, I want to say, in the $80 to $100 range. The $50 paracord whip, it's a younger beginning platter. It's just getting into it. Plaiting very straight, but still needs to work some on the core of the whip they're making. It doesn't come off the shoulder as nicely as the little bit more expensive paracord whip by the paracord platter that's been plaiting longer. This actually comes off quite nicely off the shoulder and ends with a nice little crack. When you go to bow and arrow, the less expensive whip is actually just as accurate as the one that cost almost twice as much. But you can see the one with a little better core finishes better and is easier to make a controlled puff with. So when you get into looking at these beginning dragon tails, take a look at my video on how to make a dragon tail, a homemade dragon tail, and spend a weekend and do a little craft project and see what you can come up with. They're pretty easy to make. This is a little 3-footer. So as I said, at a house party, a 3-footer is going to be small enough that you can throw it and not get in anybody's way. I prefer myself the 4-foot dragon tail only because the added length gives you a little better action and a little better rollout, so it acts more whip-like. You can see I'm getting pretty nice rollout with this longer dragon tail that I didn't get with the shorter dragon tail. Certainly not a dragon tail that's as short as this one. This one has almost no rollout just because it's so short. But if you're at a house party and there's not any room to throw, I can throw the shorter dragon tail. So all of this it's all good. I've got probably half dozen whips here, and they're all useful in the dungeon except for these 2 6-foot bull whips. If someone's interested in a 12 plat kangaroo bull whip at a really good price, then you really should write me in the comments and get a hold of me, and I will hook you up with this bullwhip for, you know, a reasonable amount of money, because I would like to see it get a new home. I simply don't have a dungeon that's large enough to throw it, and even if I did, it probably wouldn't win out over my throwing a 4-foot or a 3-foot bullwhip in contact play, because the 4-foot gives me so much more accuracy, and I have so much more fun with it, and I can dance. It's kind of hard to dance with a 6-foot bullwhip because you have limitations you have to focus on the rollout. So that's the long answer. I'm going to go back over my short answer so I can just edit this and get it down to the short answer. What do I recommend for a first whip for someone interested in single tail in dungeon play? Well, it's going to be a 3 or 4 foot whip. 3 foot if your focus is mainly going to be throwing at house parties. 4 foot if you're going to be, you know, at a dungeon that has enough room to throw a 4 foot. And we're going to recommend that you start with either a signal whip or a dragon tail. Both are types of single tails. And you can throw all 4 techniques that I teach with either the dragon tail or a signal whip. If you end up with only horizontal being your preferred style, then stay with signal whips and acquire a 3 and a 4 foot. If you find that you like overhand throwing, then you're gonna migrate towards snake and bull whips. Again, 3 and 4 foot snake and bull whips, and look at paracord as being the most economical way to get into whips for your first whip. If you're really interested in kangaroo and you want a leather whip, then for your first whip, you might look at a budget build. I call a budget build one that has a single belly and an overlay, and I would limit the length of that style whip to 3 foot. When you move beyond 3 foot into 4 foot, you really need that second belly to give the whip enough body inside the core to achieve the kind of rollout and accuracy that you're going to want in dungeon play. So we've talked a lot about beginning whips. If you made it this far, be sure to remember to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment. I didn't talk a lot about pricing because prices are going to change from time to time. What you don't want to do is go on Amazon and buy a whip that's coming out of China or Thailand or Pakistan because they're just not well enough made for dungeon play to be accurate and finesse with the whip bottom, and it's a waste of money. I've seen several of these whips at dungeon parties. People ask me what I think, and have yet to find one that my end conclusion was you didn't waste your money. I don't want you to waste your money. As always, thanks for watching Whips in the Dungeon.